June 1944. The morning haze hung low over the northern coast of France, thick with salt and static. A German reconnaissance pilot, Hauptmann Karl Fischer, steadied his Messerschmitt at 6,000 feet. Below him stretched what looked like an enormous fleet, landing craft, destroyers, even tankers, scattered along the grey water near the Pas-de-Calais. Through his lens, he saw waves breaking against hulls, smoke drifting from funnels, and what appeared to be the faint metallic glint of sunlight bouncing off steel. He radioed his findings immediately. Berlin received the photos within hours. Analysts in a dimly lit room spread them across a table, tracing ship silhouettes with trembling fingers. It was everything they feared, a massive Allied buildup, preparing to strike at the narrowest point of the channel. The order came swiftly: hold position. Reinforce Calais. But there was one problem. What Karl Fischer had photographed didn't exist. Those ships, hundreds of them, were made of wood, canvas, and paint. Some were barely more than skeletons of plywood frames stretched with fabric, their funnels puffing smoke from hidden generators. Others were nothing but flat outlines painted on the ground, their shadows carefully faked by nets and light tricks. Yet in the black and white blur of aerial film, they looked terrifyingly real. So real that the German command delayed critical troop movements for weeks. So real that the entire invasion of Normandy, the true Allied operation, gained precious days of advantage. This was no accident. It was the result of meticulous deception, born not from soldiers, but from artists, engineers, and dreamers. Back in England, a group of American and British officers studied the same coastline from a different perspective, a war room thick with cigarette smoke, maps, and blueprints. Their mission: to make the impossible believable. They weren't just planning battles. They were creating illusions. To them, war was theater, and the audience was Hitler's intelligence network. Each fake ship had a story, each shadow a purpose. Engineers calculated the exact position the sun would take at 0900 hours to ensure the illusion of depth on Luftwaffe photos. Painters darkened sections of canvas to simulate rust. Radio operators mimicked encrypted messages to reinforce the lie. And so, from afar, it looked like the Allied fleet was ready to strike at Calais. But in truth, the beaches there were empty, quiet except for the wind and the waves lapping against wooden ghosts. Fischer would never know it that day, but his discovery was one of the greatest illusions of the Second World War. The operation was part of a vast deception network, later known under one code name, Operation Fortitude. For months, the Germans would remain fixated on a phantom army, a mirage crafted by imagination, carpentry, and nerves of steel. And as dawn broke over Normandy on June 6, while real Allied troops stormed beaches hundreds of kilometers away, wooden ships still floated off Calais, untouched, unchallenged, and entirely unreal. War, they say, is won by those who make the enemy believe the wrong story. And on that foggy morning, the Allies told one of the most convincing stories of all time. In the quiet corners of Fort Belvoir, Virginia, a team unlike any other in the army was taking shape. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were painters, sculptors, architects, sound engineers, and even actors, recruited not for their ability to fire a rifle, but for their ability to convince an enemy that the impossible was real. The unit was officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but among themselves, they called it the Ghost Army. Its mission: to use art, science, and imagination to deceive the Nazis at every turn. Lieutenant Colonel Harry L. Smith, an Army officer with a background in engineering and a love for stagecraft, oversaw the operation. He believed that warfare was as much about the mind as it was about bullets and bombs. If a German general could be tricked into seeing threats where none existed, entire divisions could be immobilized, and lives saved. Recruitment was unusual. Instead of traditional boot camps, new members were tested on artistic skill, spatial awareness, and improvisation. Some were landscape painters, capable of making a canvas look three-dimensional from hundreds of feet in the air. Others were theatrical designers, experts in creating props and visual illusions that could fool the most experienced enemy observers. Engineers collaborated closely with artists. They calculated exact dimensions for wooden tanks, flat decoys, and mock artillery, ensuring that from above, everything would appear proportional and real. Even small details mattered: the angle of a cannon, the tilt of a deck, the precise shadow a hull would cast in sunlight. Sound specialists joined the effort. Using recorded engine noises, artillery sounds, and troop movements played through mobile speakers, they created the illusion of active units where only silence existed. A German reconnaissance plane flying overhead would hear the rumble of tanks, the chatter of troops, and the distant whine of aircraft, yet below, only empty fields and carefully arranged decoys waited. Each operation was planned with military precision, down to the last detail. The Ghost Army would move under cover of night, erecting massive decoys, setting up sound systems, and ensuring every illusion could survive the scrutiny of aerial photography. They had days to transform a barren field into a theater of war. When the first reconnaissance photos were analyzed in Berlin, they confirmed the Germans' worst fears. The Allies were everywhere, strong, and prepared. Yet the reality was far simpler. The Ghost Army had turned imagination into a weapon, and for months, it would keep Hitler's forces guessing, hesitating, and misallocating their resources. In the history books, their names are rarely mentioned. Yet these men, artists, engineers, and dreamers, played a pivotal role in shaping the battlefield, proving that sometimes, the mind can be as lethal as the sword or the rifle. The story of the Ghost Army's wooden fleet begins not with soldiers, but with engineers hunched over drafting tables, pencils scratching against paper, and rulers measuring every line with obsessive precision. Their mission: to recreate an entire invasion fleet without using a single ounce of steel. At Douglas Aircraft and General Motors plants across the United States, engineers, carpenters, and artisans collaborated in secret. They were given blueprints of tanks, landing craft, and artillery pieces, and then asked a question that seemed absurd: how can we make it look real from 5,000 feet? The solution was both simple and brilliant. Tanks became plywood frames, stretched with canvas and painted with meticulous attention to detail. Funnels, barrels, and gun turrets were sculpted from rubber and lightweight metals, then attached to wooden chassis. Every shadow, every curve, every reflection was considered, ensuring that from above, the decoys looked indistinguishable from the real thing. Landing craft were built as hollow shells, anchored just offshore or positioned on beaches. Smoke generators created plumes that mimicked engines firing, while ropes and pulleys simulated movement, giving the illusion that the vessels were maneuvering into attack positions. Engineers even installed mirrors to catch sunlight at precise angles, creating glints that fooled German aerial cameras. But visual deception was only half the challenge. Sound specialists developed a network of speakers and recorded tracks, playing the sounds of engines, marching troops, and artillery fire across miles of open terrain. From the air, the deception was complete. The Germans could hear, see, and record what appeared to be an entire army, yet on the ground, nothing moved but wood and smoke. The first prototypes underwent rigorous testing. Artists painted them, engineers measured shadows, and sound operators timed their recordings with the rising and setting sun. Every detail was documented. Even a small error, a cannon pointing the wrong way, a shadow cast incorrectly, a smoke plume rising too fast, could reveal the illusion. By the spring of 1944, the wooden fleet was battle-ready. Hundreds of decoy tanks, artillery pieces, and landing craft stood in fields and along beaches, waiting for the German reconnaissance planes. Each one had been carefully numbered, catalogued, and positioned according to meticulous plans. For weeks, the Germans would study these fleets from the sky, convinced that a massive invasion was imminent at Pas-de-Calais. And for weeks, the Ghost Army's combination of wood, canvas, paint, and sound would keep them guessing, buying precious time for the real Allied forces to prepare for D-Day. April 1944. The skies over northern France were alive with German reconnaissance flights. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs skimmed low, cameras whirring, capturing every detail of the Allied preparations. On the ground, the Ghost Army's decoys stood silently, every tank, gun, and landing craft meticulously placed, waiting for their moment to deceive. Hauptmann Karl Fischer, the Luftwaffe pilot who had first spotted the fleet, transmitted another report back to Berlin. Allied forces massing at Calais. Entire invasion fleet visible. Reinforcements should be dispatched immediately. The message traveled through the chain of command, prompting urgent responses from generals who had long feared an attack on the narrowest point of the channel. By now, the Germans had no reason to doubt what they saw. Every photograph, every radio intercept, and every eyewitness account confirmed the illusion. Analysts pored over aerial images, tracing shadows, angles, and shapes. Each frame suggested strength, mobility, and readiness, yet beneath it all, there was nothing but wood, canvas, and carefully placed smoke. Hitler, informed personally of the threat, ordered the 15th Army to fortify the Calais region. Troops were dug in, tanks positioned, and artillery emplacements prepared, all for an invasion that would never come. While these forces remained frozen, the real Allied preparations at Normandy proceeded undisturbed. Even German intelligence officers marveled at the precision. "The enemy moves with such coordination," one memo read. "Our aerial reconnaissance shows movement day and night. Their strength appears formidable. We must not underestimate them." Meanwhile, the Ghost Army continued to refine the deception. Engineers adjusted positions based on sun angles and cloud cover. Sound teams orchestrated the rumble of tanks rolling across open fields, synchronized with the movement of the wooden fleet. Each day, the illusion grew stronger, convincing the enemy that an entire invasion force awaited at Pas-de-Calais. By the time D-Day arrived on June 6, 1944, the Germans were still fixated on the decoys, expecting an attack that would never materialize. Thousands of soldiers remained in Calais, misallocated and immobilized, while Allied troops landed in Normandy, achieving strategic surprise. The deception was complete. A fleet of wooden ghosts had changed the course of the war without firing a single shot. And for the men of the Ghost Army, this silent victory, unseen, uncelebrated, but critical, marked the beginning of a legacy that would remain secret for decades. By the summer of 1944, the effectiveness of the wooden fleet had become undeniable. German intelligence had spent weeks studying the decoys, convinced that an enormous Allied force was concentrated at Pas-de-Calais. Every aerial photo, every intercepted transmission, reinforced the lie. Hitler's commanders, fearing catastrophe, kept their best troops in place, waiting for an assault that would never come. The real invasion unfolded hundreds of kilometers to the west. Normandy's beaches were assaulted by genuine landing craft, tanks, and infantry, facing resistance that was fierce but manageable. Thanks to the Ghost Army's deception, the Germans were caught off guard, their forces dispersed, their strategy delayed. Each wooden tank and fake ship had contributed to a decisive tactical advantage without a single round fired. When the Allies reviewed the aftermath, it became clear how many lives had been saved by the illusion. Entire divisions of German soldiers remained immobilized, guarding empty beaches and fields. The delay and misallocation of forces allowed Allied troops to establish beachheads and advance inland, shortening the campaign and reducing casualties. The men who built, placed, and managed the wooden fleet rarely received recognition. For decades, their work remained classified. Only after documents were declassified in 1996 did the story of the Ghost Army emerge in full. Veterans who had constructed plywood tanks and orchestrated phantom movements recounted their experiences with a mix of pride and disbelief. Private First Class John McCarthy, who had helped paint and position decoy artillery, recalled, "We were told to make it look real. And we did. I never fired a shot, but that work saved lives. That's what counts." The wooden fleet became a symbol of ingenuity in warfare, proving that imagination, planning, and courage could be as powerful as any weapon. By tricking the enemy into seeing strength where there was none, the Ghost Army demonstrated that war was not only fought on the battlefield, it was also fought in the minds of men. Long after the invasion, as historians pieced together the events, the silent victory of the wooden fleet stood as a testament to the power of creativity in war. Sometimes, the greatest victories are the ones that leave no visible scars, only stories, waiting to be told.